Yo, what's up, everyone? Yo, Sup here, back with another episode of Sidelines, and today we're going to be going over the first 2 weeks of the CDL, kind of give my thoughts on the teams, any roster changes that were made, how I think that the first 2 weeks went for them, and if they should be concerned or thinking about making roster changes, but overall, kind of just giving a recap of how the first 2 weeks went and what to expect for the future. All right, let's get into it. All right, so hopping into it, we're going to start with our standings, and of course, first overall is Optic Texas. No surprise to anyone. They are the previous world champs, EWC champs, coming into this as the winning team from last season, and they've looked consistent and dominant this year. They have not changed their team at all from last year. It has strictly been the same team. I think part of that is helping them is that out of the top teams, they are the only team that has stuck from last year. Last year, it was FaZe that was the same team, and Optic were the only two teams really at the top that stayed the same. The other teams in the top had switched. LA Thieves switched. They had a two-person change. And then also, actually, LA Thieves had a three-person change last year. Toronto had a two-person change. And I guess it was New York, Cloud9, they had a full roster change. But FaZe and Optic stayed the same last year. Those are probably your top four teams at the start of last year. But this year it has been Optic, Gentlemates, Toronto, Thieves, FaZe. Those are your top five teams, I would say. At least in my standing, those were my top five teams. But to start, Optic has, gone 3-0. I don't think they've really played anyone that you could say it was a difficult matchup for them. They have gone 3-2 with Miami, which was pretty shocking, I would say, for most people. I don't think many people thought that the Optic Texans were going to get 3-2 against Miami, but it was a good series. They did end up Nesloing them, which is actually kind of insane. Especially because that was something I definitely did not expect. But the Minnesota series, again, they lost a hard point, but the Falcon series to start the week was 3-0, pretty easy. They haven't really played one of the top teams yet. It isn't that surprising that they are 3-0. They do get FaZe, sorry about that, coming back at the beginning of the split. Well, the beginning of after the break on Saturday, they will match up against FaZe. So that will probably be their first test of the year that will really actually show if, how good of a team they are, how good FaZe is, and all that good stuff. I'm not sure if they do play, LA Thieves at any point in the year. It seems like they play Vancouver, and then I don't know who else. Oh, they do play LA Thieves, and then Carolina to end it. I think that will be their last, match of the series. So they play FaZe and Thieves next year. At the end, well, technically next year. Um, I know as corny as to say next year, 2026. It is technically next year, so they do play FaZe and Thieves, so they will have two matchups, but then they also play Vancouver and Carolina, the bottom two teams. So at worst case scenario, Optic will be going 5-2 into the split. That'll probably give them a 1 or 2 seed, depending on, how things shape up. But honestly, they're 3-0. They'll at least worst case make winners finals if they don't go 7-0 in this first major split. But then moving on to Gentlemates. Gentlemates have had a pretty good start of the year too. Gentlemates started out at the beginning of it playing Vancouver, which was not a hard matchup for them. Then they lost 3-2 actually to FaZe. That was a crazy series. Talked about it in the first week's recap. Probably one of the best series so far. It was actually insane. And then they door dashed Thieves last weekend. So, they've played two of the top teams. They don't end up playing Optic this split, but they have played two of the top teams. That's pretty crazy. They play C9, that's pretty easy. Falcons, they'll probably win that. And then they end it with Toronto. So they actually have somewhat of a difficult schedule to still end. Oh, they do finish with Miami as well. On top of that. So, Miami, Toronto, those are some tough teams. They get Cloud9 and Falcons. Even Falcons could be a tough one for them too. They got three matchups in there that could be difficult, could go weary, but I don't think they'll lose any of them really. If anything, Toronto and maybe Falcons on a good day could give them the most pressure, but I think Miami and Cloud9 they'll probably have easy work of. But Paris Gentleman's look good, man. I really like Dan Ghosty. He's one of my favorite players. He's been one of my favorite players since he's entered the league. The guy's disgusting. He's super smart. Sib having a really good redemption year. Envoy continuing his thing, and then Neptune honestly continuing his thing too. I did see a clip on TikTok about him talking about the team and how he was kind of the person that created the team, and he was happy with the team that he got. He wanted to play with Envoy and Ghosty if they were free, and then he was like, "Why wouldn't we pick up Sid? This guy's a shooter," which I understand completely. I think last year he didn't really have much help on C9, and this is a really good team for him. So I think overall they're probably all pretty happy with their situation. They probably aren't happy with that phase series, but they could be 3-0 as easily as Optic could be. Um, but they're looking good. I think they don't have any problems to worry about going into after the break. I think just continue what they're doing right now, and they'll be good. Next up, we have Toronto Koi, actually in third place, which, again, not surprising. I've had really high hopes in Toronto. I will say, though, they have had, they are 2-1, but they have had somewhat of an easy schedule. They started out with Miami and Vancouver, and then ended it off with FaZe. The FaZe series was very good. It wasn't, that insane of a matchup, I would say, against FaZe. Um, like that crazy that they lost it. It did go the distance. The one surprising map, I guess, against FaZe was the Colossus Hardpoint. That was actually pretty insane. I was surprised that they lost that one. But then they ended up losing the Search at the end, like 6-4 or something like that. So, nothing too insane for Toronto on that sense that, they're 2-1. They got their 2 freebie wins, I would say, against, Miami and Vancouver. Um, and then they had a tough match against FaZe, played it good, showed that they're good, they're capable. Toronto is a very good team. This team has a lot of pace. The reason Colossus surprised me the most was because of how fast paced it is, and how you can have multiple subs. And they have 3 subs on their team. They moved Kleenex to a AR role, but they still do have 3 subs on their team, which I think is pretty good. Then you have LA. Toronto does have a decent split. They start out first weekend playing LA Thieves as the last match. Then they got Carolina, which is a tough, easy win. So, got a hard one, easy one. Gentlemates and G2. So they could easily go 2-2. They could easily go 4-0 against, this end of the year split. Like after in the vacation before Major 1, they could go 4-0. They could go 2-2. I don't see them losing to Carolina. I don't really see them losing to G2, but maybe worst case scenario, they go 1-3, which would be pretty insane. But overall, I think they are a good team. I think they will, make the best of it. I don't think they'll probably go 1-3. I think worst case scenario, they go 2-2, might upset these or Gentlemates and go 3-1. But overall, even at 2-2, they'll be 4-3. That's being in winners finals or winners bracket for, the next major split, which for them is probably pretty good. I don't think they'll be too upset about that at all for any means. LA Thieves, shockingly 2-1, I would say. For most people, not super duper shocking. They did have a tough split. They started out with FaZe, won a series 3-0 FaZe. Everyone's like, all right, Falcons 3-1. Not surprising. Probably should have been a 3-0, but, still not surprising. Gentlemates, they start out with a tough series. They got the first 3 matches. They got FaZe, Gentlemates, Falcons. Not a terrible team, but not a bad, good team either. But they got, honestly, 2 of the top 4 teams in the game on their first 3 matches of the year. So Thieves starting out 2-1. They did beat FaZe, did beat Falcons. But I think the way that they lost to Gentlemates is concerning. The FaZe series, they did win 3-0, but it wasn't as, insanely dominant as the Gentlemates did against them. Overall, I think they're not upset. I think a lot of people are calling for Kenny's head right now. Um, the stat board watching, on the bad teams when they played Falcons, he was doing good. When they played FaZe, he had a good KD. If they're winning, he's doing good, but when they're losing, he's getting shit on. It's like, well, if you look at the Gentlemate series, everyone except for Scrap was kind of getting shit on, and even Scrap barely got a 1.0. But Hydra and Abizi both had like a 0.7, and Kenny only really had a 0.65 or something like that. He wasn't far behind. Honestly, I think Gentlemates just played a lot better in that series, and I don't think there's really one player that you could, pick towards. I think the biggest thing that Kenny offers is his in-game leadership of he's a veteran. He knows how to play the game properly. He knows how to direct people. I think Gentlemates just played a lot better that series, and I think people need to probably chillax. They're going back to last year. If Kenny was getting shit on last year. If you look at the start of the year last year before they got Pred back, Kenny was actually not getting shit on. It wasn't until they brought Pred back that Kenny started getting shit on. So I think a lot of people need to look at that before they say, "Oh, last year he got shit on. They went 0-18 with him." Yeah, they went 0-18 with him, Pred, Shotzi, and Dashy. He was the worst of the worst at the time, but he wasn't the only one getting shit on. And he didn't start getting shit on until they brought Pred back. And I think there was a lot of issues with trying to teach Pred how to play the game, catch him up to speed, all that stuff that caused Kenny to be so in shambles. He didn't know what his teammates were going to do. Where this year, he's like, I know where my teammates are going to be. They're good players. They've been playing since the beginning of the game. All that good stuff. I think people need to chillax and stop calling for his head. I know Alluka is the one guy that people have been talking about, and he's pretty insane, but I think they just need to chillax on the Kenny propaganda of get him out, he's dog shit, all that good stuff. So, I don't know. I think these are fine. I think they'll figure it out. Well, they already have it figured out, but I think they'll be fine for the first split coming back into it. They have Toronto, tough series, but they probably should win it. Optic, that's a tough one. All right. Boston, Carolina. Boston could do some creepy things and upset them. I don't think it'll happen. Carolina's an easy win. They do have Toronto and Optic. Both those could get hairy. They could end up losing those. They could go 1-3 at the end, but again, probably not. Even if they do, they'll go 3-4. They'll make winners. I don't think many people would be happy if they did that, but they probably will be fine. I don't think they'll really do that, but overall, I think they'll be fine. I don't think there's anything to worry about as a Thieves fan for the next split. I think they'll definitely make winners bracket, and that's honestly all that really matters. I know you want to be a higher seed, you play the worst seed, but the way this year is, there's so many good teams that I don't think it really matters where you are in winners bracket. I think as long as you're in winners bracket, that's all that matters. You don't want to be losers where you lose one game and you're out. If you have winners, you have a good chance of winning. All the time you have to do is win 3 matches in your finals. So you're going to have to beat the best anyways. If you're in winners, you get that chance. You get paired up against Optic or something. First match, you take them out. It's like, all right, we should have a pretty easy run to the finals at least, So I think that's a good thing. Next up is Boston. I wouldn't say surprisingly in the top 5, but also I would say surprisingly in the top 5. Also 2-1. They lose to Falcons, which, if you think about it, Boston had a chance of being in that top with Optic. But they did play Carolina. That was pretty easy for them. Carolina's not the best team. And then G2 was a pretty big upset. Good comeback from them. And then they lose the Falcons. I was actually shocked that they lost the Falcons after the way that they beat G2. But I don't think a lot of people were surprised. Falcons made a lot of good plays. Boston did have a chance to win this. I think the biggest troll was in the, overload against Falcons. I think they kind of trolled away that map. Pred made a really good play, and so did Exnid, but overall they still kind of trolled that one away. But 2-1, still good. I don't think they have anything to worry about. They do go against Vancouver. That should be a win. Put them at 3-1. Then they got Miami. Could be a little hairy. Could go up 4-1. Could go 3-2. Cloud9 probably go up 4. And then they finish it off with LA Thieves. So they'll probably go 2-2 in the split also. Or 3-2. 2-2, yeah, because they only play 4. They already have 3. So they'll probably be 4-3, I would say. Could go 5-1. To go into the major. So Boston, good chance of making winners bracket. That's pretty good on them. Next up is Falcons. Falcons have had a split. They play Boston. Good win for them on Boston. They play Carolina. Not a good team. Should have won that. Thieves. And then, oh wait, they're 2-2 actually. Yeah, because I forgot they played more matches than everyone else. They have Optic and Thieves first 2, so they started out 0-2. Tough kind of draw. Then they get Falcons or Ravens. Good win. Not surprising they won that one. And then, yeah, they get Boston and a good win for them on Boston. So they ended 2-2. They actually the first match after the break against G2. That one could be a little hairy for them. I think that one could be a loss. Then they play Gentlemates. Could be another loss. And then they end it off with Cloud9. So Falcons, they got a tough end second half. They got 2 losses that they could get. They got 1 loss. I think, honestly, they'll probably beat G2 the way that they were looking at the end, and they'll probably beat Cloud9. So I think you're looking at 3-4, 4-2, 4-3 for them. Either way, they should not, they're definitely going to beat Cloud9. I think they'll be 3. wins, and that should be enough to get them into winners. A lot of these teams below them with 1 win or no wins have no chance of making it into, winners bracket. They really only got to get 1 win probably, and they'll probably be winners. I don't think they'll have to worry too much about that. Then we got Cloud9. Cloud9 looks all right. They're a little bit of I wouldn't say a bad team, but they're also not the best team in the world. I'm not a fan of their team personally. I'm not a fan of their team personally. Um, you got Afro, Beans, Vivid, Mac. It's a lot of guys. Again, I haven't been watching the CDL for a very long time. MW2 is when I started. I'm a newbie, fresh to the scene, but I've watched most of the CDL. I've watched, what has there been, 6 years of CDL, and I've watched 4, or there's been 7 years of CDL, and I watched 4 of them, I think, because there was, Cold War, Vancouver, Vanguard, and MW 2019. Those are the 3 I didn't really watch. So I have seen 4 out of 7. So majority of the CDL I've watched, and these guys have been in the CDL for majority of the time that I've been here. Never really huge on Afro, never really huge on Beans. Mac, he was good in MW2 on Vancouver, or Surge. I guess they were in Vancouver at the time. And then Vivid last year was really good. Actually, I'm surprised he got dropped. But again, they're not the best of team. They're all right. They'll probably make a roster change, but again, it would be for a lot of young guys. I don't think they really need the recycled pros. But I will say they are 1-2, and they lost to G2. That was a winnable series. They beat Vancouver. That was not surprising. And then they lost to Miami. So, but both series they've lost, they've lost close ones. 3-2 could have went their way, could have not went their way. Vancouver, they 3-0'd. I think this team's all right in the mid-pack. I think as soon as they play, the top teams, it's not going to look so good. They start out, they got to play Gentlemates. That's a loss, probably. I would be very shocked if they beat Gentlemates. They got to play FaZe. Again, very shocked if they beat FaZe. They do get Boston, could win, but again, I would honestly be surprised if they beat Boston. I have Boston on that one. And they play Falcons. Again, I'd probably be shocked if they beat Falcons. They're probably going to go 0-4 at the end of this split. I think the series they were meant to win, they were going to win at the beginning. If anything, they could go 2-2 and be happy. Maybe go 3-4, squeak into winner's bracket. But I probably don't see it. I think they've honestly missed the chances of winning. If they went 2-1 or 3-0, they would have been the best chance. They played the worst teams are probably going to play already. I don't think it's actually true, because every team that they're going to play next is above them in the standings. They play Gentlemates, they play Thieves, they play Boston, they play FaZe. They play Gentlemates, Boston, FaZe, and Falcons right here, all above them. So, not looking too good for them. If you are a Cloud9 fan, it's probably not going to be a great second half. They'll probably be in loser's bracket to start the major, but they could upset and go 2-2. They are able to beat Boston and Falcons. Gentlemates and FaZe, I probably don't see happening. I would be very shocked to see them beat them. And then next up is Miami. I will say Miami has surprised me. Trace has been a good addition. I really thought going into this year, I did have him high up on my tier list. I think I had him in B tier. Maybe top B tier, possibly below A tier. I probably should check on that tier list again just to make sure I know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about tier list and where I put people at the beginning of the year. But I was still thinking that the team was good. Super and Rencor were a great addition. As soon as they picked up those guys last year, they became a lot better. And, Metals is definitely still their X factor. But I thought Real getting poached, I guess some people could say, but just switching to Toronto was really going to hinder them. I honestly thought it was going to be a big hindrance to their team and make them a lot worse. But they ended up being all right, actually, and they look good. They brought Optic to a map 5, and they look good in those hard points against Optic. And even in the searches, they didn't look that bad. It wasn't that easy of a series for Optic. They take the first hard point, good win. People were shocked. 6-4 in the search and destroy. Then they lose the overload, which was pretty close again. Optic played good. Crazy comeback on that den and win by 1 point. And then 6-4 in the last search. And honestly, if it wasn't for Merck, they might have won this series, which is pretty incredible for them. Um, so played great against Optic. I would say probably the best match Optic has had this year. They beat Cloud9 in a 3-2 series. It was pretty good. I don't think it was probably the most polished series for them. Um, they did lose. That one hard point wasn't great for them. But again, not a bad series. And then I forget who they lost to first. Oh, Toronto, that's right. And again, they brought 3-2. Like they've had some good matches. Every match has been a 3-2 either way, right? So I would say you can't be too upset about it if you are them. Um, I think you've had some close series, could win. Toronto, realistically, you could have beat Toronto and Optic. You brought it to map 5. You did clutch up the one. They are good. They look a lot better. Let's look at the next matches. They got Carolina. That's a winnable series. Vancouver, winnable series. Boston, winnable series. And then they should have one more. Gentlemates, probably not winnable. But they could go 3-1. And they could be 4-3 and make winners. There's a big chance. They could also go 2-2 and be 3-4. Honestly, I think 3-4 might be enough. I wouldn't be surprised if they squeak this 8 seed. I think Miami and G2 and Cloud9 are all fighting for this 8 seed. I think after we just looked at Cloud9, it's probably really between Miami and G2, but I haven't really looked at G2's second half of the split. But G2 probably could do it. I think right now, off of that, Miami probably has the best case scenario to do it. But let's look at G2, G2 also 1-2. They start out the year against Cloud9, 3-2 win. It was a good clutch up from them in that map 5. I actually do like G2. I think they are probably one of my favorite lower tier teams. I'm really happy with, that the fact that they picked up, Mamba. I thought he was really good at EWC last year. Skies, happy to see him back. Estro and Kremp are a pretty good sub duo. And I think this team, if they're performing good together, they could be a good solid team. If they are playing together and all flowing at the same time, they could be a good team. Similar to kind of G2 last year when they had Kenny at the end of the year with the squad that they had. They were one of those teams where it's like if they're playing good together, they could be good. But they did kind of get unlucky. They beat Cloud9. Then they have Optic, and then what was their other one? Boston, and the Boston series was a bad loss, honestly, for them. That's probably the one they want back. I would not be surprised if they aren't probably kicking themselves for that one. They start up against Falcons. This is probably a split decision. I don't know if I said Falcons would win this, but they probably have a good chance of winning that one. Carolina, they should beat. That one's not bad. They do get FaZe. That's not important. And Toronto. Yeah, that's a tough one. That is a tough one. Probably going to lose to Toronto. Probably going to lose to FaZe. Carolina, you should win. And then Falcons. So they could go 2-2. Again, very much 2-2. But I think the chance of them going 3-1 a lot lower. And the chance of them going 1-3 is about as low as them going like 2-2 is that's a tough split for them, man. You got FaZe and Toronto in your second half. I think you're probably not too happy about that. I think the chances of them going 3-1 are very slim. Even 2-2 is probably a very questionable one. So yeah, I think Miami's probably gonna bump up that 8 slot and take it. Next up is Cloud9. Now, this team is not good. I don't think this team is very good at all. Carolina is not the best team. You got Slasher, Nero, Lurks, and Craze. I like that they took the risk with the two young, well, I don't know if they're young, but newer guys with Craze and Lurks. Nero is one of those guys where if he's frying, he's a good player. And veteran Slasher. I just don't think this team plays well together. I don't think they're a bad team, but I just don't think they're like a great team. They have only played 2 matches to start the year. So them and Falcons have switched. They have played the last matches. Falcons have played the most matches. They've only won 1 map out of it, and that was against Boston, which was their first match of the year, I believe. Um, but 3-1 to Boston's not that crazy, and then they got 3-0'd by Falcons, which was pretty easy if I remember. I don't think it was much like difficulty for Falcons in that sense. I wouldn't be surprised if teams one of the other teams to make a roster change. Out of the other teams, I don't think there's much reason to make a roster change. A lot of these guys have brought it to like close maps. Those mid-pack teams have brought a lot of maps to close round maps. Top teams, they're not going to make a change. They're the top teams. But your Boston's, your C9, your Miami, your G2, you're not really looking at a roster change yet. You're going to wait probably till end of Major 1, or at least after the break, kind of see how scrims go, how you're feeling after that. Maybe wait 1 or 2 matches. But for these Ravens guys, I would say you probably should switch over the break. Give yourself some time to get familiar with one another, scrim a little bit, come back in, play your last 5 matches. You got 5 matches. You got Miami. That one's going to be a tough one. G2, going to be a tough one. Toronto, that's a loss. Optic, that's a loss. And then LA Thieves. So you got guaranteed 3 losses. The best you're doing is 2-5. You're not making winners to 2-5. We've already kind of done the math. You're going to have to win 3 matches to get into winners. 2 wins is not going to cut it by any means. And honestly, 2-5, like 2-5 is going to be pushing it. They could easily go 0-7. They could easily lose to G2 and Miami. Those are 2 good mid-pack teams that on any given day I would take them over Carolina. I would not be surprised if Carolina loses. The thing is, I don't know who you take. I'm not a huge Challengers watcher. I honestly really only watch the Stallions. That's about it. I would say that there's probably some guys out there. I guess that Alluka guy would be one person, but again, I have seen a lot of pros talk about it. Why are you going to go to a shit team, possibly ruin your stock? But I think Carolina is probably the best out of the 2 teams searching for team players to go to, just because they do have Slasher as the veteran role. So you do have that. You can learn a little bit. But overall, I don't think Carolina is going to make winners, and they probably will make a roster change. And then the last team is Vancouver. They did make a roster change. They did drop Legend. I'm not a huge fan of it. I think you got to give the guy some time. I am glad to see him on the Stallions. Get some guidance from Zuma, Octane, Attach. They got a lot of guys. I was watching them earlier today. They had Sib in there helping them out. They got like Dashy going in there and helping them out. I think the only other team that has such supporting from ex-pros is the Huntsman, which is the other team I do pay attention to. You got the Optic guys giving you advice and all their coaching staff. So I think Vancouver didn't give Legend enough time. I also think they kind of put him in a bad situation. I've heard a lot of people say this, of the fact that, he got put in with a bunch of rookies. He did not have a veteran presence on that team to help him. Your most veteran player is Gwyn, who I think is in his 3rd year of the CDL. He started in MW3 and then Black Ops 6 and 7. Like, this guy hasn't had, he's not a veteran. You got Abe and Lunars. Lunars played last year, and then Abe, this is technically his 1st year. He played 1 major last year, which I think was just champs in EWC, if I'm not mistaken. They're not veteran guys. You need someone that's going to give him advice, how to play the game properly, and I don't even think the guys on his team know how to play the game fully properly yet. They're very good players, very talented, very, very talented players in the sense of Call of Duty, in the grand scheme of things. They're top 0.01% of all Call of Duty players, but when it comes to CDL, there are people a lot better than them. They did get not a tough split. They started out with Gentlemates, Toronto, C9, and then they played one other match. Oh no, they only played 3 matches. Yeah, so Gentlemates, Toronto, and then C9. C9's the one that I'm like, that one was winnable. I don't know if you guys watched it. They were close. That was not a good series by C9, and that could have went both ways. Honestly, Vancouver could have won that match. And them and C9 could be split in the 1-2 or 0-3 category. However, they are the worst team. They did end up picking up Tej, which again, I guess kind of like I was talking about, they got a lot of young, inexperienced guys. You pick up Tej, who has been playing a lot, played a lot in the CDL. I guess he is that somewhat veteran role. I don't think it's going to help their team much. You did have Gwyn and Tej play last year. I know Gwyn, I don't know if Gwyn is on the AR role. I don't know who they're going to put to the AR role, because I think Lunars and Gwyn are both subs. I know Tej is a sub. I think Legend was playing the AR role, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't know if they're just going to move someone to an AR or what, if T's going to play the AR, but that team is not, in my opinion, any better than they were with Legend. I don't think Tej makes a big upgrade. I think they probably got to scrap some people. As much as it is annoying to say they probably need some veterans who are recycled through X Pros, I think that's probably what they are missing is maybe, someone who got recycled. If you look at the C9 team, that's a lot of recycled X Pros. I think honestly one of those guys might be like someone that would be good to get in on this team. Someone who can slay, but also has played a lot of COD, and maybe could teach some of the guys that are new. I think a lot of it is the system. I know Vancouver, their organization said we're not really paying people, which is why they got rid of their team from last year because they knew that those guys were all going to probably be able to get paid because their stock went through the roof. Rambo Ray didn't get picked up again because of the same thing of we can't afford to pay him. They kind of went pay cut ish of like we're just gonna pick up a lot of young guys, see what happens. Don't have the best coaching staff anymore with Ray, um, and yeah, I think they're just kind of screwing themselves in that sense of that they don't really have that leadership role in players, coaches, even really organization. It seems like they don't really want to be in the CDL anymore, or like just pay it anymore. Like they want to be there, but they don't want to invest in it, type of thing. Um, but overall, that is my recap of how the first 2 weeks, how I think the end of the year will go. I still will do my weekly one when the next couple weeks come up and that sort of stuff of my predictions, how I think each week went, and that sort of stuff because it will be changing. Obviously, as scrims go on, maybe more roster stuff happens, all that good stuff. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of the teams and kind of what changes people should make, if they should make them. Are you a fan of get rid of Kenny, that side of thing? I don't think so. But if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe and turn notifications so you miss any of my next videos. Until next time, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.